Welcome to Life Turns, the channel where real emotions, raw drama, and powerful life lessons unfold. Today's story is one that will shake you to the core. It's about betrayal, humiliation, and the sweet taste of justice. Imagine being on the most special day of your life, your wedding day, only to discover that your own parents, the people who raised you, were secretly plotting to make you the laughingstock of everyone you knew. But what if I told you that the tables turned in the most shocking way? Buckle up, because this is not just another story. This is my story, and it's a journey you won't forget. I grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than love. My parents were obsessed with how the world saw us, how neighbors judged us, and how our extended family spoke about us at social gatherings. It was exhausting living under that pressure, and as their daughter, I often felt more like a trophy than a child. I was the oldest, the one expected to be perfect, while my younger brother was the golden boy who could do no wrong. Whenever he messed up, it was brushed aside with excuses. Whenever I succeeded, it was met with comparisons, never enough, never quite as good as someone else's daughter. This constant tug of disappointment wore me down, but I learned to keep my head high. When I got engaged, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment my parents would finally celebrate me. My fiancé, David, was kind, supportive, and someone who saw my worth when my parents refused to. He adored me, and I adored him. He came from a family that was warm, accepting, and genuinely happy about our union. For the first time, I felt like I was entering a world where I could breathe without feeling judged. But of course, my parents weren't happy, not because of David himself, but because of the fact that they couldn't control every aspect of the wedding. They wanted everything their way, from the guest list to the decorations, and when I pushed back, I could sense the resentment building. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with tension. My mother criticized my dress choice, saying it made me look plain. My father mocked David's job, claiming he wasn't ambitious enough, even though he was doing incredibly well in his career. I brushed it off, telling myself that this was just their way of dealing with losing control. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the unease. Something felt off, and that feeling kept gnawing at me. Then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, just a week before the wedding, I returned home earlier than expected from a dress fitting. As I entered the house, I heard my parents' voices from the living room. Normally, they would stop talking about me the moment I walked in, but this time, they didn't know I was there. I froze by the door, and what I heard shattered me. My mother's voice was sharp, filled with a cruel kind of excitement. She said, "Wait until everyone sees what we've planned. She'll be humiliated right in front of her precious David and all his people. They'll realize she's not as perfect as she pretends to be." My father chuckled, adding, "It'll be the talk of the town. Our daughter thinks she can defy us, but we'll show her who really holds the power." My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Humiliated? At my wedding? By my own parents? I felt sick to my stomach, my entire body trembling as their words sank in. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but they were planning to destroy it. My mind raced with questions. What exactly were they planning? How could they do this to me? I had always known they cared more about appearances than my feelings, but this was a new level of cruelty. I crept back upstairs silently, my legs shaking as I tried to hold back tears. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying their words, wondering what kind of spectacle they had in store. Was it a speech? Some embarrassing story? A cruel stunt? My imagination tortured me with possibilities, each one more horrifying than the last. By morning, I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't let them win. If they wanted to humiliate me, I had to find a way to outsmart them. This was my wedding, my new beginning, and I refused to let them ruin it. The next day, I confided in David. Sitting across from him at the little cafe where we had shared countless dates, I told him everything I had overheard. His face darkened, his jaw tightening with anger. "They can't get away with this," he said firmly, reaching for my hand. "This is our day. If they want to play games, then we'll make sure they're the ones who look like fools. His support gave me strength, and together, we started planning. It was risky, but we both agreed it was time my parents learned that I wasn't their pawn anymore. We decided to keep calm and act as though nothing had happened. I smiled through rehearsals, nodded along to my mother's criticisms, and pretended not to notice my father's smug expressions. But inside, I was burning with determination. Every time I saw them whispering to each other, I imagined the moment their plan would backfire, the moment they would realize they had underestimated me. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing them that I was stronger than their manipulation. Finally, the wedding day arrived. My stomach churned with nerves, but not for the reasons most brides feel. While others worried about vows or forgotten rings, I was bracing myself for battle. My dress shimmered in the morning light, and David looked at me with eyes full of love, but beneath it all, I carried the weight of knowing that my parents were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Little did they know, their strike would be their downfall. As I stood before the mirror on the morning of my wedding, I tried to steady my hands while brushing through my hair. My reflection looked radiant, but inside I felt like I was preparing for a battlefield. The words I had overheard from my parents still echoed in my mind, but instead of breaking me, they fueled a fire inside. David had reminded me again that morning, we are in this together. Whatever they try, we'll be ready. That gave me strength. I had spent so much of my life letting my parents control me, but not today. Today was the day I would take back my power. The ceremony began beautifully. The church was filled with family, friends, and David's warm-hearted relatives who greeted me with genuine smiles. My parents sat in the front row, wearing proud but smug expressions, as though they already knew the chaos that was about to unfold. I watched them out of the corner of my eye, pretending not to notice the way they whispered to each other. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to keep calm, reminding myself that the trap was already set, for them, not for me. When the vows were exchanged, my emotions almost got the best of me. David's words were filled with so much love and sincerity that tears welled up in my eyes. For a moment, I forgot about the impending humiliation, forgot about my parents' twisted scheme, and simply felt grateful that I was marrying someone who truly valued me. But then I saw my mother's sly smile, the way she leaned toward my father as though they were counting down to a punchline only they understood. It was a cruel reminder that the storm was still coming. The reception hall glistened with golden lights, the air filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Everything looked perfect, but I knew appearances could be deceiving. As the night unfolded, I saw my parents growing restless, clearly eager for their moment. They had always loved attention, always loved being the center of every room, and tonight would be no different. But this time, their thirst for control was about to backfire in a way they never expected. It started when my father stood up, raising his glass for a toast. The room went silent, all eyes turning toward him. He cleared his throat dramatically, his booming voice filling the space. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what a joyous occasion this is. Our daughter finally found someone willing to take her hand despite," he paused, smirking as though the next words were a private joke. "Despite her many imperfections." Laughter rippled awkwardly through the room, people unsure if they were supposed to join in. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this. Then my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh yes, we worried for years that she'd never find someone patient enough to put up with her stubbornness, her failures, and her, well, let's just say she wasn't exactly our shining star." A few gasps filled the room, and my face grew hot, not with shame, but with anger. I glanced at David, who gave me a small nod, reminding me that everything was going exactly as planned. My parents thought they were in control, but the truth was, the joke was already on them. The room grew tense, the energy shifting as people realized this wasn't a loving toast but a cruel attempt to embarrass me. My parents went on, listing exaggerated flaws, painting me as difficult, ungrateful, and unworthy. They laughed between sentences, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Guests looked uncomfortable, whispering to one another, some shaking their heads in disbelief. And just when my parents thought they had the audience hooked, David stood up. With a calm but commanding tone, David raised his own glass. "Thank you for your words," he said to my parents, his voice steady but cold. "It's always enlightening to hear how some people choose to define others. But tonight, let me share the truth about the woman I married." The room instantly hushed, every ear straining to hear him. My parents froze, their smiles faltering as David's eyes locked on them with quiet defiance. He spoke of my strength, my kindness, my resilience in the face of constant criticism. He painted a picture of the countless times I had gone above and beyond for people who didn't appreciate me, and how, despite all of that, I never lost my compassion. He told them how I was the most hardworking, genuine, and loving person he had ever met. "So if anyone here thinks less of her because of what was just said," he declared, "then you are blind to the extraordinary person she truly is." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers filling the hall as people stood to their feet. My parents' smug expressions vanished, replaced by shock and embarrassment. Their attempt to humiliate me had turned into a standing ovation in my honor. I could see the color drain from my mother's face, my father fidgeting awkwardly as they realized their plan had failed spectacularly. Instead of making me look small, they had made themselves look petty and cruel in front of everyone. I felt tears streaming down my face, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief and vindication. I had been waiting my whole life for this moment, not just to be defended, but to finally be seen for who I was. Guests swarmed around us, congratulating David for his words, praising me for my grace, and openly criticizing my parents for their cruelty. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. My parents were no longer the ones pulling the strings. They were the ones being judged, whispered about, and pitted. My mother tried to recover, laughing nervously as though it had all been a joke. "Oh, we didn't mean anything by it," she stammered. But nobody believed her. My father's attempts to regain control only made things worse. He snapped at people, insisting they were being too sensitive, but the damage was done. The more they tried to justify themselves, the deeper they sank into humiliation. They had wanted to make me the laughingstock, but instead, they became the spectacle, the villains of the night. As the music resumed and laughter returned to the hall, I finally felt free. Free from the chains of their constant belittling, free from the shadow of their judgment. For the first time in my life, I stood taller, surrounded by people who saw me, valued me, and loved me for who I truly was. And as I danced with David, his arms holding me close, I realized this wasn't just the start of a marriage, it was the start of a new life, one where I no longer let toxic voices define me. But deep inside, I knew the story wasn't over. My parents weren't the type to walk away quietly. The shame they had endured that night was only the beginning, and I sensed that they would try to claw back whatever control they thought they had lost. What I didn't know then was that their next move would test me in ways I had never imagined, pushing me to stand even firmer against the people who should have been my greatest supporters. In the days following the wedding, the fallout was undeniable. Word of my parents' humiliating toast spread like wildfire through the family and community. What they thought would make me look small had instead branded them as bitter, controlling, and cruel. Relatives whispered about them at gatherings, neighbors avoided their smug smiles, and even some of their closest friends called to express disappointment. But rather than reflecting on their actions, my parents did what they always did, shifted the blame. They claimed I had somehow orchestrated the embarrassment, that I had turned people against them. It was laughable, really, because for once I hadn't done anything. Their downfall had been their own doing. Still, the tension didn't go away. They refused to apologize. Instead, my mother sent me a message dripping with venom. "You think you won, but remember, you're nothing without us. We'll remind you of that soon enough." It hurt, but it didn't scare me. Not anymore. The difference was that now I had David by my side, and his family's love gave me strength. They reminded me that blood doesn't give anyone the right to mistreat you, and I started to truly believe it. A week later, my parents invited us over under the pretense of clearing the air. Against my better judgment, I agreed, thinking maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized how wrong they were. But when David and I arrived, it was nothing but another ambush. They accused me of turning the family against them, of ruining their reputation, of being ungrateful children. My father's voice boomed with anger, while my mother sat with crossed arms, glaring at me like I was a stranger. The same people who had planned to destroy my wedding now wanted me to shoulder the blame for their humiliation. David didn't let it slide. Calmly but firmly, he told them, "The only people responsible for your reputation are you. No one forced you to say those things. You chose cruelty, and it backfired." His words silenced the room for a moment, but then my father exploded, calling him disrespectful and unworthy. That was the breaking point. For years, I had stood by silently while they diminished me, but seeing them insult the man who had defended me so selflessly lit something inside me. For the first time, I spoke back. I told them how deeply their words had scarred me over the years. How every criticism, every comparison, every cruel remark had chipped away at my confidence. I told them I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, only to realize it would never come because they weren't capable of giving it. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I confessed how it felt to overhear them plotting against me on the eve of my wedding, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the rage. "But here's the truth," I said, my voice steady despite the tears. "You don't control me anymore. I am no longer the scared little girl you could manipulate. I am a wife, a woman, and a person worthy of love and respect. And if you can't see that, then you don't deserve to be in my life." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents sat stunned, as though they couldn't believe I had finally found my voice. My mother's lips trembled, my father's face turned red, but I didn't give them a chance to respond. I stood, took David's hand, and walked out. For the first time, I felt light, as though the weight of years of their disapproval had finally lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't easy cutting ties, but it was necessary. Weeks turned into months, and while my parents tried to reach out occasionally, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with anger, I held my ground. I wasn't going to let them back into my life on their terms. Slowly, I started to heal. I focused on building my marriage, nurturing relationships with people who truly loved me, and rediscovering parts of myself I had buried under years of criticism. David and I built a home filled with laughter, warmth, and acceptance. His family became my family, surrounding me with the unconditional love I had always craved. Every holiday, every gathering, every ordinary Sunday dinner reminded me that I didn't need to cling to toxic love just because it came from my parents. Real family is about respect, kindness, and support, not control and humiliation. Over time, people stopped talking about what had happened at the wedding, but I never forgot. Not because I held on to bitterness, but because it became a reminder of my strength. I learned that sometimes the hardest battles we fight are not against strangers, but against the people who are supposed to love us most. And winning that battle doesn't mean destroying them, it means refusing to let their cruelty define you. One day, as I looked at my wedding photos, I noticed something powerful. In the pictures where my parents stood, their smiles looked forced, their eyes calculating. But in every photo where I stood with David, my joy was undeniable, radiant, real. That contrast told the entire story without a single word. It wasn't just about a wedding. It was about freedom. It was about choosing love over control, respect over humiliation, and myself over their endless expectations. If you asked me today whether I regret standing up to my parents, my answer would be no. It was the most painful decision of my life, but also the most liberating. My wedding could have been the day I was broken. Instead, it became the day I finally broke free. And if there's one lesson I hope others take from my story, it's this: you don't owe loyalty to people who betray you, even if they are family. You owe loyalty to yourself, to the person you are becoming, and to the life you deserve. So yes, I overheard my parents plan to humiliate me at my wedding. Yes, I carried the weight of their betrayal. But in the end, they became the laughingstock, not me. And though their words once cut me to the bone, today I carry scars that remind me of strength. Strength to walk away, strength to choose love, and strength to finally live a life that belongs to me, not to their cruel expectations.